I'm looking forward to spending an hour with you and not doing all the talking. I want to walk through several things about the office and developments on our campus related to sustainability. I'm challenged in these settings to do that because we are trying to get the word out. We are trying to focus attention on opportunities and issues around this, and there are some of you in the room today that have paid a great deal of attention. Thank you. In that process, and yet we're also talking to people who have not heard much about this yet. So striking some balance between not being terribly repetitive in what we're saying, but making sure that everyone in the room has enough picture of what's going on is challenging. I'm going to try my best to do that, though, and so I want to spend the first few minutes talking about what has happened in the last year or so, things that are afoot right now, and by the end of the topic, because I know this series does have a lot to do with issues such as biofuels and transportation, I want to unpack one of those topics a little bit in terms of what I'm hearing from our important corporate partners around that and where the real matchmaking could happen. And I'm hoping to end with a bit of a conversation with you about how we do some of these things better going forward. When our campus leaders and university leaders were in place, first President White came about with a strategic plan, and it was followed by a strategic plan on the various campuses. And in 2007, our strategic plan for this campus called for a stronger thrust in the area of the environment and even mentioned energy, sustainability, some of these kinds of issues. There was no real roadmap put out there, but there was the strategic intention, if you will, to do more in this area. And this is a common theme that we will come back to over and over again. Our campus is amazingly strong in many facets of what we could call sustainability, but at the same time, we don't always easily find ourselves or work together or get that message out to society more broadly speaking. In 2008, Chancellor Herman launched a couple of things that we're really here to talk about today. The first was to put in place a Sustainability Council, which he is the chair, and the director of the Office of Sustainability, now known to be me, is the co-chair, but it includes all of the key campus leaders, the Dean for Student Affairs, the Provost, Jack Dempsey, Head of Facilities and Services, Vice Chancellor for Public Engagement, Vice Chancellor for Development, etc. And the intention of that was to bring leaders together along with a sampling of deans and students and faculty and community to begin to look at alternatives for where we go in the future and to have some body with enough authority to make some hard decisions about are we going to do this or we're going to do that. So we'll talk more about the role of the council in a little bit. And then, of course, the Office of Sustainability that was seen as being the vehicle, if you will, the body that would bring issues to the council and also operationalize progress in those areas. When I first got on board, which was just about exactly a year ago, we thought and talked with campus leaders a lot about what is the best way to make progress here. It is a really trendy thing to do to have an Office of Sustainability on campuses right now. There are 653 campuses that have committed to the University President's Climate Action Plan, and almost all of those have an office like this. What is different from the way the University of Illinois here is approaching this compared to other places is that it's not just operations, or in many cases these offices are focused on operations and perhaps campus life, student life a little bit. The intention of the way our campus is approaching this is that we need to make progress in all areas of our mission. So that means that my office is involved in thinking about the research agenda for the future, engagement, education, student life, operations, our relationships, and how we partner with surrounding communities. So it makes it both unusually challenging, but also potentially very important as we move forward. So these are the two structures that were put in place a little over a year ago, And I'll just mention a few things about the Office of Sustainability. When I came into this office, we had already committed to sign on with the American College University President's Climate Commitment. And that actually, we're finding out, is a very substantial commitment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the moments that follow. But we have been going through a greenhouse gas inventory in the past year, and we have to come up with a plan for how we are going to move toward climate neutrality, if you will, in coming decades. And we're finding that to be quite challenging and interesting. But this was an immediate task that my office was given. Some other ones come to mind as well. What about the enhancement of various campus infrastructure policies? Just all kinds of examples of this. And maybe I'll just throw one out that is such a classic illustration of how our campus is. A year or so ago, I guess it would have been a year of spring, there was an alumnus that was walking on campus here to see the graduation of their child. And he said, you know, gee, I'm going on the quad and I'm throwing my pop can in the same place that I'm throwing my bag, and what sort of dark ages is this place in? So he emails the chancellor and other campus leaders and said, you know, I'm really disappointed that this campus is not taking sustainability seriously. Just had this experience on the quad. I'm stuffing all this stuff into this waste barrel. Have you folks ever thought about recycling? Well, the answer to that is that we are actually pretty good at recycling. We recycle a little over half of our solid waste, and that container that comes from the quad or wherever is hand sorted, and that's where it goes from there. And it's a good example of, in some ways, our campus has been doing important things, thinking about how to do even more important things, and not telling the story. So we find ourselves needing to make more progress, but also not being particularly good at saying what we're already doing. So this communication part of the role here is really important. And encouraging innovative research collaborations. There are lots of examples of that, and one that has just become public, and you'll hear more about if you track sort of University of Illinois and key partner relations. We have formed a memorandum of agreement with the military's Office of Sustainability Innovation Advancement, which is actually for the whole CERL and the defense enterprise in this community. And we have formed an MOU, an agreement that basically says, you know, the military has really important issues around sustainability, and the military would like to make the University of Illinois a special partner in addressing those kinds of things. And now that that MOU is in place, I think that we'll see the opportunity for a lot of funding and streamlined partnerships. One example that the military is considering right now is they have huge installations all over the country, some of them community-sized. And and they have an intended goal to be able to take military installations offline with an array of alternative energy sources. Wouldn't it be cool if this was a place where they went to do research and demonstration about what that might look like? So an example of taking advantage of some research collaboration opportunities, another role that my office plays. And I do a lot with the external constituencies. We have been fortunate that the governor, because of Gary Miller's activities, a lot of your activities, this particular unit, and my office, the governor has found the University of Illinois to be very interesting. And he has high expectations for what we're doing and what we do that sets an example and identifies best management practices and helps the state of Illinois move in this arena. So that's another whole challenging and really pretty exciting opportunity to think about how we relate to our surrounding communities. Tomorrow, I take that back, Friday, there will be the rollout of what is the reinvigorated CCNet. Were any of you here in the 1990s and perhaps participated in CCNet at that time? The idea of CCNet was it was a partnership between the Chamber of Commerce and the University of Illinois saying, you know what, we have a hotbed of internet-related broadband technologies here, and if we really worked carefully together, we could make this a leading community in those kinds of technologies, which indeed Champaign-Urbana is. The thinking is to reinvigorate Champaign County Net around sustainability. And for the last 6 months or so, there has been a very, very extensive amount of foundation building in places in the Champaign-Urbana community that interest in this has not been particularly high. We have engaged business leaders, we've engaged community leaders, many people to hear them out and talk about this idea. Would we like to reinvigorate CCNet around sustainability with the goal that this place, these communities, the partnership between the University of Illinois and these communities can lead us to make this a special place in terms of a real amenity and the kinds of things that are going around sustainability. So in the next couple of weeks, you'll begin to see press events around this, and CCNet is going to be relaunched and reinvigorated as a means by which we work together with our community to make this a leader and an important place in sustainability. Another good example of a kind of activity that my office has taken on. We're just beginning to talk about forums and meaningful dialogues and other things that we can do that will help facilitate conversations around sustainability. As you can imagine, there are just endless opportunities there. And I want to just not spend any time really in terms of defining sustainability, but as I move forward in talking about some of these things, many of my examples today have a strong environmental or maybe even energy bent, and I think the reason for that is that seems to be where a lot of our pressure points are on this campus as well as opportunities. But I do not mean to fail to recognize that this really is a multifaceted, triple bottom line kind of thing. We understand that economic sustainability, social sustainability are very, very important in this as well. So I want to talk about what happened last year when the office was put in place, and the thinking about, I mentioned that the office is somewhat unique in having these all parts of the university mission on the table, and then just contemplating and talking with campus leaders about, what's the smart thing to do here? Should we just get really focused on campus operations and be a leader in terms of, let's say, energy efficiency or whatever, or should we find a way to design a process where people can participate in their ideas and consider sort of two tracks? One is imagining some point in the future, I don't know when that point is, what timeline there is, and the timeline's not defined, where the University of Illinois is looked at as a true leader in this globally. And if we wanted to get there and be at that point, what are our strengths? What would we want to focus on in that way? And the other part of that is much more practical, what's in front of us, what are the work that needs to be done right now. And we're moving forward on both of those tracks. We have a vision statement and document that has been developed. I see several people in the room here that have been both talked to and listened to and have had some shaping of what these ideas might be. And yet at the same time, this will be the first time that some of you see what we believe, and just from a variety of conversations, community meetings, and other forums, we've arrived at what could be two global grand challenges that the University of Illinois could be a very, very strong player in. I might mention that wordsmithing around these continues to go on. The document is a living document, but more or less the Sustainability Council has certainly approved the visioning process that we're along and supports the vision document that we have, but also acknowledges that there are some really vague timelines in there, and this is great stuff, but what are you going to do tomorrow? So we're now focusing a lot more in what are you going to do tomorrow or today. So we've taken these grand challenges, and by the way, there have been, Barbara Minsker, a faculty in engineering, has been in the provost's office for part of a release time in the last year and this year, and she has helped with this process, but there are now many, many students, faculty, staff involved in this ongoing plan process. So this is sort of a broad view of the vision, and there's actually a lot more detail and examples of why we think that we can play into this in the future in the actual document if you go to my office website. One other observation, though, that seems very obvious, if you look at our campus and the things that we do here, there are very few places on earth that have one of the major agricultural colleges with a global reach, the engineering college with the kind of stature and importance it has, the scientific surveys, if you will, and the way that they are engaged with the needs and a very strong research and outreach agenda, the kinds of strengths that we have in information technologies and informatics, and on it goes. And if you look at all of those things, there are very few places on earth that are as well positioned to address the sort of food, water, energy nexus that we're moving into. And that nexus is playing itself out, variations of the same theme, different pressure points perhaps, all over the world. Look at Georgia. 2 years ago, Georgia had one of the most serious droughts. I might have that wrong, but recently, Georgia had one of its most serious droughts. And on it goes, the issues that play out here. So we believe that we have developed a vision statement that is appropriate and has really excited our corporate partners. We've also broken this down into goals. And right now, we have some task forces that are in play and are actually looking at goals 1, 2, and 3. I'll say something. Goals 4 and 5 are complicated by fiscal issues and fiscal sustainability and business models and incentives and how university budgets and relates to its units around budgeting. So we're still sort of untangling, if you will, and taking some very early steps in shadow budgeting around energy and other things to learn. But the first 3 goals have task forces that are very active right now, and those task forces will be reporting their ideas about what should we be doing right now. What are we going to start doing in January? A year from now, what will we have done? A very focused look at this, and the reporting out of those ideas will go on in October. The 2 very public, or not very public, but very clear stakes in the ground about reporting would be on October 13th, there's a Sustainability Advisory Committee around my office that has about 40 members on it. Faculty, community, students, staff, many different kinds of people. They'll actually take a look at these ideas and help us shape them. And then October 26th, the Sustainability Council, the one that's chaired by Chancellor Herman, will take a look at the ideas as well. And we're also trying to relate sort of the scenarios that we're developing with what can our campus afford to do. In spite of very, very difficult fiscal times, I think it is possible, perhaps even probable, that the campus will invest in the ideas that we come forth with in October. And we cannot make progress in sustainability and spend no money doing it. It's going to have to be a priority. So we're actually coming in to the Provost's office later this fall with scenarios of the kinds of things that we can do in sort of a low, medium, high range of what it would take to do certain kinds of things. And I won't spend really any more time talking about the kinds of ideas that are coming forth for there, but the forum, John Marlin and Tim and I were just having a conversation in the previous hour about it seems like whenever we want to do something that takes a new step around energy or the environment or whatever, our culture is to create a new structure and to say this is going to be the place that this goes on. And when we've talked about the opportunities for sustainability on this campus, there have been campus leaders that immediately moved to that thought pattern and said, whoa, is this another Beckman? Is this an NCSA? Is it some big thing that we're going to throw in the middle of our campus organization that will try and be more cross-cutting? I don't know about that. I think what we need to do is find ways for the units that exist to work more carefully together. And that's sort of the central goal of this forum. How do we provide a rich set of opportunities for people to come together over this and in many sort of fashions. Very low fashion might be a Miller-Com-like seminar series, which almost undoubtedly will come about based on the forum recommendations. Another one could be much more complicated and enduring, where we have people that do release time studies for 6 or 8 months and retool what their careers are and refocus them. We may bring experts in residence in. So there's a range of ideas about how we really embellish the sustainability activities on this campus. Education is a very interesting topic right now. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about the views our corporate partners have around what we should be doing in education. But again, there's a whole range of possibilities here. I think it is likely that next fall, I am hoping, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but hopefully next fall there will be a discovery course series around sustainability. And there's certainly some active conversations going on around curriculum, gen ed courses, certification around certain kinds of curriculum on our campus, and how can we begin to build some minimal knowledge and exposure to sustainability in our coursework, in our curricula, and what does that really mean for the competitive advantage that students might have when they enter the workforce. And then just one other thing to just briefly mention on, but it is one that is indeed daunting, and that is the operations part of our campus and how it relates to sustainability. That also is a very active task force, and the good news on the operations standpoint, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, is that we have been setting ourselves up to make some real progress in the energy front and some other fronts for quite a while now. I mentioned recycling. That's just such a good example of progress that has been made long before my office came in place or there was a current sustainability buzz on campuses. But there are many other parts about this. This morning earlier I was in a meeting about, so what are we really going to do to address the climate action plan around our physical operations? And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So 5 goals, a lot of interest around these goals, wide participation not only by students, faculty, staff, but also the community. I have been, probably shouldn't have been, but I am really surprised at the interest that our surrounding community has in what the university is doing and how we might partner. And again, that goes back to what will soon become public around CCNet. Just some examples of operations and progress that we are now set ourselves up to begin to really demonstrate in a quicker way. Some statistics on energy consumption. We've actually been in the national news about dramatic improvements in energy consumption in the last year or two. And we have some fairly aggressive energy reduction plans in mind, and most of you know, if you were to walk over there and cross St. Mary's Road, when that new facility comes online with the biggest battery computer in the world, it will ramp up our energy consumption 25%. So we want to meet these so that we can get back up to zero when all this is done. And that's a really challenging perspective, because that is what the University of Illinois, among other things, offered to attract that here. It also, by the way, provides us with some real opportunities in our general strength in IT and computing to begin to contribute to that very energy-intensive industry with ideas. And Tim has been very involved with the e-waste. It's a good example of sort of a spin-off of the fact that we are leaders in IT in many ways, and while we have some costs associated with that, we also have some real opportunities to be leaders in what that means around sustainability. So a brief look at our goals and some examples here. I never thought about, I guess when I got in the office I was very surprised to learn that our most energy intensive buildings on campus were not even metered until fairly recently. So we know that we have 80-some buildings that take 90% of the campus energy. We sort of knew that, but now we really know it because they're metered. And one of the real challenges that we have in learning about how to do cost-effective energy savings is what's the benchmark when you're not measuring it. So in the last couple of years, the biggest energy users on campus, at least at a very superficial level, have been metered. In some cases, they've been metered in a very sophisticated way. In some ways, they haven't. But because we now know what energy use is in a particular building, we can go in and do some retro-commissioning kinds of activities, and that typically is light bulbs, control mechanisms, very relatively low-cost kinds of things, and learn that we can more than recover those costs in a matter of months. So a lot of the dramatic energy reduction that we saw last year was not because we had a warmer winter, but because we really do know where the biggest energy hogs are, where the lowest hanging fruit might be, and we are learning what measures are most cost effective. We have a long, long way to go. We are a big, big energy user. In 2003, the budget for energy on our campus was $25 million. In 2005, the cost of energy on our campus was over $50 million. A couple of years ago, it had spiked to $70 million. Right now, the University of Illinois, system-wide, has a note, so this is not funny money, has a note that it is paying interest on for $110 million for past energy bills that were not adequately resourced by our state revenues. It is believed, or so our campus is being told, that $98.1 million of that $110 million is ours to do something with. I mean, think about what it is going to take not to just pay our energy bills next year, but to deal with a $100 million hole that we're in the kind of fiscal situation that we're in right now. I've learned not to be overly idealistic going to campus leaders about it would be really cool if we could do this or that, because they're sort of in shell shock about, oh no, here's another financial request. So we're in this dilemma of the fact that we've spent a lot of money that we didn't have to spend, and we're in this hole and we're in tight fiscal times, but we're going to have to find ways to invest to pick this low-hanging fruit, and I think you'll see more of that. There's intentions by the provost's office and other campus leaders to free up a pool of investment funds that have the short payback like that. There's also the plans that units will own their own energy bill in the future, and if they can make energy savings, they can also appreciate that savings, and it'll come back to their business model. Lots of experimentation going on about both retro-commissioning and also how we invest in this. The Student Sustainability Committee has a modest investment fund to help units learn about how to make progress in this area. I want to talk about this commitment. I mentioned it earlier. When Chancellor Herman signed on to this in February in 2008, we were told that by May of 2009 we needed to submit our greenhouse gas inventory. I'll actually show you a few interesting statistics about that in a minute. But that meant that by next May, we have to submit what is our plan over how many years or decades to get to sort of climate neutral. What is that going to look like? And this is going to be a very, very challenging exercise, so challenging that just this morning I was sitting in with the Director of Facilities and Services and saying this is going to be very, very challenging for two fronts. It is how do you look into the future? How do you assign different kinds of alternative energy sources coming on? And how do you make a plan that in essence upends the business model and the way the University of Illinois has related to its units in financing things? There are huge fiscal implications for any plan that we come out with. So it is both a technical challenge and it's also going to be a political challenge when units begin to understand that the implications of this would be that life is going to change. Now, there are many people on our campus today that believe that we will see the day when there will be decommissioning of buildings. We'll no longer use certain buildings. We have the biggest square footage of facilities of any Big Ten university, including Ohio State. So there's just lots of interesting statistics like that out there. So some of the things that we'll be challenged with in forming this draft plan, let me just, this is maybe a little hard to read here, and I'd encourage you, you can go to my office website or this organization's website and see anybody that submitted a plan. The point I'm making here is that the world is watching us. Any university that commits to this, there now has been 653 universities, have to submit their plan, their inventory, and that becomes public, and then their plan becomes public. We'd love to know how our Big Ten peers are doing with their plan, but the fact of the matter is nobody's ahead of us at this point in the Big Ten, so therefore there's no Big Ten peer that we can say, well, what's their plan going to look like for the future? But this is a really challenging exercise for us in the next few months. And just a couple other, you can get in there and see examples of, you know, what our greenhouse gas inventory is for. How much energy do we actually purchase or use for coal versus, you know, outside electricity purchases. And some really interesting statistics in there if you want to go to it. One of the hardest parts about this is our travel-related component. And for those, you know, we had to get into some complicated assumptions and algorithms about travel for faculty, and both air travel and also from surrounding communities. But if you really want to get into the nuances of how this stuff churns, there's some really interesting things that are out there right now. Wanted to point out that this just hit the news last week, and in spite of all the enthusiasm, 653 colleges have signed on. We're having some real problems with follow-through and actually beginning to develop a plan. And we're really worried about this. Campus leaders are telling me, they're pointing this article out and saying, Dick, don't go there. You know, our plan needs to be submitted. But I understand why many of these institutions have not been able to do it in a year. It's politically and technologically complex, and to do it in a really thorough way, if indeed decommissioning of buildings were to go on, it would change in very important ways how and when courses are offered. So things begin connecting here. You know, how does classwork learning go on our university, and what is the implication to buildings, to energy, to our carbon footprint? They are very much coupled, and the issues become really complex because we're starting to talk about behavioral changes in this way. This is really interesting. I've pretty much covered this already in terms of the number of colleges involved, but look at this one. The University of Colorado at Boulder was not able to submit their plan on time. I like to point this one out to university leaders. They have 50 people, 50 staff in their office. So they were turning on this, and they punted and said, we can't turn it in time. An interesting thing about the Boulder is that when it gets down to it, it really is not capacity so much as it is, once that plan is out there, opinions, interest, controversy begins to escalate. And what they've really had a challenge doing is managing all of the interest, input, and divergent feelings and opinions about what their plan is. I want to talk a little bit about corporate relations for a minute here, and I'm taking more time than I thought I would. I don't intend you to read this, but I am putting up on the screen a question, and that is, how important is sustainability to corporate entities that knock on our door or we knock on their door? And I want to just unpack a little bit some information that is very, very recent at this point in time. Since I've been in the office, I've noticed that, and I'm being told, that a very high percent of the corporations that are on our campus and making visits want to talk about sustainability. I don't know how many high-level corporate leaders I've talked to, but it's a lot. And there's a lot more that would like to talk. And I think it is for two reasons. Corporations are really wrestling with sustainability, and second, they see what sometimes we have a hard time seeing, and that is that we are unusually strong in this food, water, energy nexus that's playing itself out all over the world in different ways, and many other technological information kinds of ways. The challenge is, how do we get more effective and efficient in learning about what corporate world's needs are and following through with some matchmaking and opportunity? And so I want to show you just a little early sifting of information that we have from some of our key corporate partners. By the way, the University of Illinois Corporate Relations, and this would be typical of a big place like this, has 20 to 25 corporations that they feel they have to pay a great deal of attention to. They pay attention to a lot more than that, but there's 20 or 25 that they say, this has so much potential that we've really got to be intentional about what this is. Caterpillar would fall into that. IBM would be in that league. Abbott Labs. I could go on and on. There are many other ones, but what I decided to do this summer, because we hear anecdotally that corporations are interested in changing the curriculum and the way that students experience sustainability. We hear when leaders are on campus, they're interested in this and that. We decided to do a more systematic conversation with about 10 or 12 of our major corporate partners. And we set up, I actually had a colleague of mine help me with this. We looked at everything those corporations said about themselves in the sustainability world so that we were not asking them to repeat themselves, and we looked somewhat well informed in this. An example of that, Caterpillar has an amazing sustainability report, and it's an amazing organization in terms of what they're doing in this area, and it's one that has real roots even to this shop. IBM, Abbott Labs, you could go on, have some really well-formed information about this, and of course they do want to tell their story, and they do have their spin on this, but they're also being very deliberate in what they're doing in this arena. But so we were careful to learn what they were saying, and we asked them a series of questions. And it was interesting, in some cases, those corporations just figuring out who they needed to answer the questions. And I'm not going through the list of questions that we talked about here, but one good example would be the student part of this that I mentioned. We asked them, what do you think? And of course, some of these are engineering firms, some of them are pharmaceutical, some of them are information technology, so they're not all the same. But what was interesting was that we didn't hear many of them say, yeah, that engineering degree or that degree over there needs to radically change. The two common themes that we heard from them about students are that they do want them to have enough exposure in their curricula to understand the issues here, but that doesn't need to be a major. And their biggest stumbling block is sustainability, and these issues mean a wide perspective and the ability to connect dots in unusual ways, and that's the kind of person that they're looking for. So we don't know how you teach that in the classroom or what you can do, but it's that approach to life that we think is very important as we move forward and hire people. And by the way, there are several of those corporations that would hire every engineering student that graduates in a year in this place. Some of them are that big and that interested in us. But we did start to pursue some of the kinds of reasons that these corporate entities partner with the University of Illinois. I want to go back to something here. I mentioned this a little while ago, and some of you have participated in these meetings. I've been in many of them where a corporate partner is coming to campus. And corporate relations office thinks about, well, we kind of know they're interested in water and, it's microchips or whatever it is, and they assemble an itinerary of faculty that they think might be interested in what they're doing. And what I've noticed about those dialogues is sometimes they go really well, and sometimes it looks like a bunch of eager faculty and scientists that want their 6 minutes in marketing what they're really good at and what they're interested in. This issue of how do we listen to what our corporate partners really want And then what do we do about it is very much foremost in my mind, because in the Office of Sustainability, which is kind of looked at as being a front door for corporate partners, it's not my role to sell my own research program. It's my role to figure out what their interests are and to hopefully more efficiently and more effectively match up what those interests are. So we're actually talking about ways and tools that we can use that will more efficiently fast-track that kind of listening process and communications. But here are some of the kinds of things that we heard from the first 10 that we interviewed. And of course, as you would well expect, the interest would depend a lot on what the mission and the business model of a particular corporation is. But we noticed these kinds of things, and I thought I would try and unpack for you one example of the more in-depth communication between about 10 corporate partners in biofuels. Not all of them were particularly interested in biofuel, or it wasn't a frontline sort of issue for them. Some of them, it was very much where they saw the world going to. And the way we did this was to try and, first of all, understand what they were saying about themselves from their printed material and other things we could get our hands on, and help them to take a first blush look, at least, of what we're doing in that particular arena. So there had been learning that already went on both sides of this. Us trying to figure out what their interests were, us also helping them with at least some rudimentary understanding of the kinds of things that we're doing. And I want to roll through about 9 or 12 statements, common themes, if you will, that we heard from these corporate partners around biofuels. And I think that you will very quickly get to the theme that I'm going to close with here in a minute. And I am going to close with this and maybe entertain a few questions after we unpack the biofuels a little bit. So here are the things that they're interested in. And I won't read them word for word, but you get the gist here. The sustainable biofuels industry, minimize negative impacts. Look at point 2, the ability to bring together biologists, agronomists, economists, lawyers, policymakers, and environmental scientists. You know, we talked about this a little bit earlier when I mentioned structures and how do we help people work together. The real challenge here is that these corporations see that we have these different kinds of domain expertise, and they believe that we can efficiently bring them together around their issue. And that ain't so. I mean, it can be very difficult for us to be the convener or do the kind of cross-cutting interests that they have here. The big view of the entire supply chain of biofuels and things that are going on here. We know you guys do all this photosynthesis research at different levels. More of a crop systems approach to research and assessing the impact of pests and plant pathogens. Engineering solutions. Again, several of you in this room have some real relevance to these kinds of interests. And we very quickly get to drought prediction and mitigation as well. And I think you get the point. You know, there isn't one of these common. These are the most common statements of interest that we heard from these that don't challenge us to behave differently on this campus than we often do. They do challenge us to be collaborative, to be multidisciplinary, to work together in new ways. But I think, to me, the take-home message from this is that we are going to have to work together in new ways on this campus to really maintain the interests of these kinds of partners. And if we do, we will be one of the few big, super high-powered research institutions that is really accomplishing this. And then you can think for a long time about what would be incentives or other things to allow us to really get in this. So I wanted to especially just spend a little detail looking at this because I know that many of you are interested in biofuels. And again, I would just conclude this by saying this is us knowing, you know, their interest in that, giving them some background information in what we do here, and you tell us, you know, what you'd like to do for us. And it's a fairly impressive, vast, complicated list of things. And I would conclude by saying this is how the sophisticated parts of the world that need knowledge, that need engagement, that need progress, are looking at the value proposition for partnering to places with the University of Illinois. Our challenge, I think the challenge of the Office of Sustainability, will be to help our campus not only just in the research domain of these kinds of things, but move forward and addressing these issues in ways that our community benefits from them, as well as Caterpillar implementing a new technology in a developing country. A more holistic approach to this. Exciting and challenging. And with that, I want to stop and maybe entertain a comment or question while we still have a little bit of time. Is that fair enough? Thank you. Questions? Comments? Yes.
I'm a member of the Champaign County Board, and I'm vice chair of the Environmental and Land Use and on the Transportation Committee. How are you working on outreach to the local community, local government? We're now working on through the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium on protecting the Mahomet Aquifer, as well as the Land Resource Management Plan for the next 30 years in the county, to see how we can save and sustain our agriculture here. And I was wondering what the outreach is to our county.
Well, let me just sort of amplify a little bit more those very important things that are going on. I can give you some examples of how my office has been involved in them. But I think the most important answer to that question is, where do those things go forward? How do we make them go forward? In the case of the Mahomet Aquifer, incredibly important, and one that I've tracked carefully, being the director of the Illinois Water Resources Center, talked with Derek Winstanley, many of the other ones. I believe what you will see happen with that one in terms of carrying the community involvement forward is, within a matter of months, a working group, and that's how CCNet moved forward historically. It was, if you're interested in this, you come to this working group, we'll provide some structure, but you all self-select on issues that are important, and let's see if we can help to move forward. Undoubtedly, that's going to be one of them that will happen. I mean, that will be... the land use change right now, and getting a little bit more focused on my office, there have been groups in the area that have been asking for a land use change plan. I mean, there's sort of the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission is involved in one now, but
it's already in our hands. It took 2 years of work, and it's been passed by the steering committee for land resource planning. It took 2 years to put it together. There's 96 policies, 10 goals, and it's in our hands now.
Okay, it's in your hands right now.
Final approval, any changes, updates, and then on to the county board, which will happen in the next couple of months. So we're pretty much at the conclusion of what the next 30 years is going to look like in the county. My concern, of course, is how do we work with you in perhaps identifying recharge points on the Mahomet Aquifer, which is extremely important, not to put urban development on top of the recharge points, which would cause massive damage to the aquifer. We know the next 30 years the wars are going to be over food and water.
Absolutely.
So my goal here, coming to this meeting today, is to see if I can sit down with you.
I'd love to do that, and some kind of matchmaking that we are doing in a couple other ways. You're very aware of the Middle Champaign watershed issue and flooding hydrology. The leaders of that have come to my office to see if there's a way that I can help get the kind of student and faculty interest that could do some problem solving in that, and we're moving right along with that. That is actually happening in terms of design phase. Another example would be taking the land use plan that you have. There's interest in a spin-off climate action plan. I'll get back to why would we want to do that, or why do these citizens want to do that in a minute. And an economic analysis, more what if about land use change, more what if about climate change kinds of things. The interest by citizens in the climate change part of this is right now cities this size, communities this size haven't done that, and ones that have been able to leverage a lot of federal funding for that. But the point is, and that's another example where citizens have come to me and said, can your office help us identify the expertise with faculty, staff who do these kinds of things, and yes, we can do that.
So we have worked now to talk about sustainability and climate change. We've passed recently the wind farm ordinance.
Yes,
for Champaign.
yes,
I was instrumental in putting together
yes.
that program with both sides
Mm-hmm.
in a bipartisan effort to get a super majority. So, we will have our first application from Inver Energy next month, and the first turbines will be placed in Champaign County hopefully by April, and within the next 5 years, see 400 turbines placed here. We're thinking about millions and millions of
Yep.
pounds of carbon and pollution in the air that's going to be replaced with clean energy of these wind farms. So I think
Yeah, and
we're doing
that's
our
a
part.
you are, and that whole activity and getting everybody to the table was very interesting. And just to take that a little bit further, the University of Illinois has a couple of interests in that happening.
They canceled their wind farm.
Well,
program.
so here's what happened.
But I think in the long run, they would have saved money had they continued
Well,
to
and you know,
replace.
I would like to think if had the Office of Sustainability been in existence years ago, the communication problems and the lags around that whole campus turbine thing could have been dealt with differently. We are where we are, but two interesting things about what you just said and the county setting the stage here. The leaders of GE, many of them were on campus a couple weeks ago, and I met with them, and the first thing out of their mouth, Dick, those were GE turbines we were going to put in, and we're alumni, and we're interested. And I had said, you know, I will point out, you ratcheted the price of the turbines way up, and that's what got the whole idea off the table. Nonetheless, your thing with the windmills there are GE turbines.
Yes, they are.
And GE was told that those are GE turbines, and would there be some possibility, Facilities and Services already talked to that entity about this, of wait, if we're going to have first 130, then more, could we get a very cost-effective add-on of a few turbines right here? And that conversation is live. GE is very interested in that. They walked out of that meeting and started dialing their cell phones on that. And another thing, I mentioned the climate action plan here, and what are we going to do for offsets, alternatives, or whatever? Those windmills offer some possibility for a cleaner source of energy for the University of Illinois to get. So just two ways that we're tracking that. It's very interesting.
Okay, we're going to have to take
Oh,
a quick break
no.
here. Well, you don't have to stop, but I know a lot of you have to be places, so if anybody needs to leave.
Yep. And I have a meeting to have to be at it in 10 minutes, so I'd like to at least get a few more comments and
Right,
questions
I was
in.
gonna say, anybody has to leave, feel free to get going right now, and then
We
we're gonna
need to
take a
keep
few more
talking.
questions
We need to,
as soon
yes.
as the disruption's over. So.
Well, another question or comment?
Yeah,
Let's keep them coming.
I just have a quick question. I'm an engineering student, a graduate here in civil environmental. How can myself and other engineering students get involved? Where would you like help?
There are a couple of obvious ways that you could do that. One is there are at least 9 student groups that somehow have interest in the environment that are tracking what the office is doing very closely. So, participating in those student groups in that way is another. Another way that you can do this is sign up on our website, be aware of announcements that we're making, and when we get into the next phase of, so how are we moving forward? In our own campus operations, we're trying to seed each one of the task forces and groups with a nice spectrum of students. Student involvement in this stuff, is absolutely essential. So you can email me. I can make sure you get on those lists or whatever, but we're really welcoming student involvement in this. Yes?
Comment. I think what your office and university is doing as far as saving energy on campus is very admirable. But I just wanted to make a comment that you showed few slides on the amount of energy and the dollar that you're saving, assume based on the energy. And then you showed a slide that, there were like 500,000 tons of CO2. Just as a comment that in the Illinois, the amount of CO2 that is emitted to the atmosphere on the annual basis is about 300 million tons. That's a large
Interesting.
number. So I'm saying that
Interesting.
energy saving is very nice, But even
Oh,
the whole campus.
I totally, and I think there's wide recognition in this. Our current provost, and sitting down and doing a signal check with him before we ramped all this stuff in the fall with task forces, whatever, said, we got to stop burning all this coal, or at least putting everything up in there that we are right now. We have to come on board with some new technologies. Yeah. I said, yes.
Okay, through your whole speech, I only saw one area, and that was in the energy usage part, that there were numerical goals that needed to be set.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What are the numerical goals that you want to set, and how do you measure success?
That the activities that are underway right now with task forces are tasked with what are the metrics, what are the measurable outcomes. That is part of the conversation that's going on right now. I have my own opinion. I could tell you what I'd like water to be, or whatever. But the point's well taken, and that is that at least in many of the we can't do this in every area, but in many of the areas that we move forward with, we need metrics. And actually, a very interesting one that we wouldn't think of as sort of in energy natural resources is that there's a fairly sophisticated survey that's now being done of University of Illinois students when they come in and when they leave. I would like to see a rigorous evaluation in the beginning and the end of some things around their view, knowledge, whatever, sustainability. We need metrics in a lot of areas. That's the point. That.
Because I know that in the private sector, you're dealing with IBM, you're dealing with CAT.
Oh, they've got them.
It's all about.
Oh, it is absolutely amazing.
Numbers and how you measure success.
You better believe it. So true. And if you can't do it, it's not one of their top tier goals. You're right. We'll be we will have numbers in things like water and many other energy related things, but some of them, I mean, part of it is this is a little bit of a cultural change. We're not used to affixing those kind of corporate world metrics, and now we're going to figure out how we do it in our world. So, any other questions I can't answer very well? Okay.
I got one question.
Oh, go ahead.
I understand that you're like looking at the big picture and the plans for over so many years, but are you doing any like smaller activities, like for example just getting rid of the plastic bags?
Yes.
Or just recycling in every single building?
Yeah, there's a lot of very specific things going on right now in terms of foods. What percent of foods in dorms are from where? How can we improve that? What about composting? The Student Sustainability Committee would like to ban water bottles on campus someday. You may not walk in with that.
I'm an international student from Leeds, and we just had that.
Yep. Yeah. So those sort of clear. What can we say we did a year from now? I've not shared many of those details, in part because it's really important that some group gets around these and buys in to these goals. But there are a lot of those in sort of, dorms. The plastic bags come up a lot, but the real traction I think is going to happen with water bottles in that sort of example. Did you have a?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. Like, I've been living in IT now, and for the last 2 weeks we've been using paper cups and paper plates.
Yeah, there's some. That's right. There are some places that are definitely making progress. Another thing to point out here is that in a place like the University of Illinois, reliable knowledge should be very, very important. And life cycle analysis, what really is a trade-off between doing this and not doing this. There are many areas in the sustainability movement where those metrics are pretty sparse or not well thought out. I mean, I think we can add an awful lot of value in the full life cycle. What are the real trade-offs in this and that? And I'm hoping that students are very, very interested in this, and some of the projects that they decided to adopt, the Student Sustainability Committee, by which has the highest revenue of any Student Sustainability Committee fund in the country, and they're talking about seeing if there's interest in doubling or tripling it. If you get to some of the projects that they funded and say, let's get to the whiteboard and talk about how much, what the greenhouse gas profile is, or what are the real metrics that change because of this, it's a very great learning opportunity because sometimes we don't know. One other comment or question. Nora, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you see as the role of the surveys in some of the implementation of some of the vision problems?
To generalize on a conversation that Tim and John and I had just before we came in here, I think the scientific surveys get engagement. They understand how to listen. They understand how to identify a significant problem. They understand how to work with external partners, and they know how to collaborate. That model of behavior, forget about the content area, that model of behavior is very, very needed on our campus right now. So that's one way of looking. I think the technical expertise is also very important, the kind of information that we have available, whatever. But I guess I would just want to point out in this era that we're moving into, a more engaged university, that's what you offer, is the model. And you're very, in places in scientific surveys, also very involved with students and mentoring of students. So I don't, over time, we could see a lot of other sorts of collaborations among the scientific surveys and places on campus emerge, but I've noticed that, of course I have a bias coming from the scientific surveys, but I've really noticed in my conversations with corporate partners that a lot of our campus is not used to this listening, responding, collaborating, problem-solving approach. So number one in my mind is the example and the model that the surveys are. One other quick comment? Yes.
One of the things we're trying to do here is we've initiated a Design for Energy and Environment laboratory.
That's right.
We are using multidisciplinary groups of students and faculty researchers to tackle product development problems for industry around the issue of sustainability and energy efficiency. Also, just very quickly, you mentioned the student funds were really helpful in funding a class that we taught in e-waste, electronic waste last year, which culminated in an e-waste design competition in which a lot of bright students from engineering and design and other areas of campus demonstrated what can be done with some of the electronic waste and how to possibly begin to tackle that problem in the future. And we're continuing that with an international competition this year that's in the planning stage.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I didn't see you sitting over here, but I would have pointed you earlier when I mentioned the e-waste stuff. But we are already beginning to be perceived as a leader in the e-waste thing. There's a lot of space for us to occupy, which some of you are moving into. Is very cool. Walmart as an example, invested in that, as did others. Yeah, it's a really neat sprout of people who just see the opportunity and have the vision and just go into it. And at the end of the day, the University of Illinois is a highly distributed culture. That means that we are way on this end of not being top-down. And I'm not going to change that culture, and I doubt it'll change in my lifetime. The challenge begins to be, where do you see the sprouts and the real capability and the things, and how do you help those along, as well as conveying new opportunities and things that are coming along.
That slide that's a couple of ones back on corporate benefits is certainly the bright minds and some of the best students in the world.
And I didn't point that, but that is probably they're very, very interested in our students. Well, thank